Empowering Educational Expectations, Perspectives of Visually Impaired Students, presented at the California Transcribers and Educators of the Blind and Visually Impaired 2017 Annual Conference. Survive or Thrive, SOT. This presentation is courtesy of Ann Wai-Yee Kwong, Danny Thomas Vang, Karen Arcos, and Nancy E. Aguilera.
So that's what she wanted to let y'all know. I wanted to share a personal story. This young man here on the screen, for those of you who can't see, was smiling. I hope he looks happy. But this is Filbert. Meet Filbert. He's one of the students of Survive or Thrive, again, which is a support group and mentoring program we all co-founded back in 2012. He was a little bit not sure what he wanted to do with his high school life. We met him when he was a junior. He's also visually impaired. His family did not attend college, and they actually all immigrated from Indonesia. So they kind of don't really know how to navigate the American education system and also post-secondary options in general, especially for their son who's visually impaired. The parents thought, they encouraged Filbert, look at your cousins, they're all going to college right after high school. That's what you should do. We feel like that's going to be great for you. You're ready. But then some of his counselors and teachers told him, Filbert, have you heard about independent living skills centers? Those are places where you can learn how to cook, clean, and mobility get you more ready to face realities of the world. So what is a young man supposed to do when he has so many sometimes contradictory or conflicting options? He wasn't really sure what to do. So he decided, after hearing about Survive or Thrive's information sessions, that he would give it a go, come and listen, and he got interested and involved later in the mentoring program. During the mentoring program, because of the conflicting information that he received, he was very hesitant. One day he would say, I'm determined to go to an independent living skills center. The next day he'd be like, well, maybe a college right off of high school. So he was still not really sure what was the appropriate path and that's suitable for him. We ran through different pros and cons of each option with him. Oh, if you went to an independent living skills center first, maybe you would be able to learn how to cook and clean before going to college. That would prepare you. But at the same time, you might need to go to a community college after. So we ran through different scenarios with him. But he was a little confused. So we'll return to what happened to Filbert later on in the presentation and move on to the other half. I'll pass it off to my colleague Karen to tell you a little bit more about Survive or Thrive.
So to give you all a sense of what Survive or Thrive is in the first place. Survive or Thrive, as Anne has mentioned, is a support group by and for students with disabilities and their families. Survive or Thrive organizers are dedicated to helping students succeed rather than simply survive. By survival, we mean scarcely manage to support oneself and devoid of your sense of worth and fulfillment. In contrast to survive, by thrive, we're referring to students who are able to prosper while reaching their self-satisfaction. The purpose of Survive or Thrive is to help visually impaired students and their families plan post-high school goals, as well as develop the independence and self-advocacy skills to achieve their goals, and most importantly, to promote parent cooperation and involvement with the participant. So now I'll pass it on to Danny, who will let you know more about Survive or Thrive.
So there are 3 components to Survive or Thrive: biannual workshops, the mentoring program, and the occasional social gatherings. Every year we host 2 workshops, one in the summer and one in the winter. And themes range from college to independent living skills to stepping out of your comfort zone or even disability disclosure. And if students feel as though they want more individualized and personalized, extended working with a mentor, then they can join our mentoring program, which is very special in a sense that based on their post-high school goals, we'll assign them to a specific mentor. For instance, if a student wanted to go to an independent living skills center, they would come to myself because I went to the Highland Center for the Blind. If they wanted to go to a 4-year right away, they would go to either Karen or Anne. And Nancy's not here, but if they wanted to become a parent or go to a community college beforehand, then they would go to Nancy. And outside of that, we attempt to host a social gathering at least once a year, either a cooking event, a picnic, or a game night, just so students can interact with volunteers, their family members, organizers, and other peers as well on a more social level so that they can intermingle and spend time with family and friends playing accessible games, and either that being like braille out snake oil or throwing a 3-pound go ball at each other, you know. Who doesn't love throwing a 3-pound ball at each other, right? So we're going to go on to the 3 objectives of our presentation. Number 1 being acquire cultural competency and awareness. Number 2, learning self-motivation skills from the student perspective. And 3, number 3, learning family-oriented communication strategies to incorporate all parties.
So I'm going to start off with the cultural competency piece. Again, this is through our experiences of coming from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, as well as working with different families. We've learned a few things from our experiences. I wanted to first base our discussion in some theory. Who doesn't love theory at like 10:30 in the morning? To blow your brain! All right. So I have here a very minuscule triangle, or this very minuscule triangle on the screen, or you can just imagine a triangle in your head. Okay, perfect. Sorry, y'all. You know, when my teachers told me to imagine things, I really hated it, but I'm telling y'all to do that same thing. Oh, how hypocritical. All right, so here's a triangle that we have, and I'm going to use this to discuss Vygotsky's cultural historical activity theory, which is a fancy name to discuss how subjects, like people, teachers, students, use mediators, which are tools to accomplish the object, the goal or purpose of anything. And that this is all encompassed in a cultural setting, in a big circle around this triangle. And to be more specific, if you want to think about it, the bottom left corner or vertex would be the subject, the top would be the mediating tool, and the bottom right would be the object or the purpose. And that is all encompassed in a cultural frame. We use culture to interpret people's actions, and also different cultures express themselves in different ways. I'm sure you all have heard of the IDEA, or the name has changed now, but it's still kind of referred to as the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And there are long-term goals that, for me, I felt like we accomplished some of when I was going through schooling, but maybe some of it still needs work on. So the long-term goals are equality of life opportunities, independent living, full participation in community, and economic self-sufficiency. And I'm particularly speaking about independent living and economic self-sufficiency because we're talking about transition, right? After school, you have to do something with your life. At least that was my hope. Work and be productive or live independently. And so I want to go back to the mediating tools and focus specifically on 4 particular points. The first is different communication styles, that we use different ways of expressing ourselves so that others can understand us. And this is based in a cultural setting. So there's something called low context communication, which is when you are more based on exact literal meanings. Your communication is based more on words versus something called high context communication, which I feel like as a Chinese person who immigrated from Hong Kong, we do that a lot. We are more subtle, using body language or talking, beating around the bush to express ourselves. For instance, somebody would invite me to dinner and they'd be like, oh, this dinner was nothing, even though they spent like 10 hours preparing for it. Oh, it may not taste as great. But if you try saying and being honest and being like, yeah, it tastes bland, where's the salt? I don't think they'll be very happy. But to some people who may not be aware of those cultural differences or subtleties, they might be honest, and that way you wouldn't really have a very collaborative atmosphere because now that person's a little bit offended, right, that you didn't like their food. Also, in terms of body language, there's different ways, and for me, my mother, when she attended IEPs, she would say that staring at somebody, an authority figure, like an administrator or a teacher, is seen as disrespectful. But in the Western culture, I feel like staring at somebody, or not staring straight like intently, but looking at them is a sign of you're paying attention. So those are some of the cultural discrepancies that I think that as individuals working with families and other young people with disabilities, we should be a little bit cognizant of. Next is the cultural definition and view of disability. And this may vary among different cultures and professionals. So there is a view that compliance is what people strive for in Latino cultures, whereas communication is what we want to strive for, right? Everybody's an equal partner. We want to solicit everybody's input. But sometimes in Latino and African American cultures, that might be seen not participating as much as being compliant, purely obedient, but that's not the case. It might be that, again, they're showing respect. So those are different subtleties. The third is, I feel like sometimes in an IEP meeting in particular, or meetings with professionals, there's a lot of jargon used. And sometimes the translators don't have access to that definition of the jargon in advance. So you have IEPs, O&Ms, the alphabet soup, and as somebody who's not familiar with English, you might be like, what is this talking about? So looking at the meeting as providing the notes to translator families in advance so they can participate because they know what you're talking about when you're referring to AT as a technology, it would be helpful. And also seeing it as a celebration rather than just focusing on your child didn't meet this goal, they didn't meet this goal, and they didn't do well on this either. Looking at it as, oh, you know, Johnny did really well in this and we should celebrate together what he's done and discuss next steps so he can continue to progress. And lastly, I wanted to speak about historical traditions of disability and the collectivistic versus individualistic thinking. So, independent living has a very different meaning depending on what culture you're talking about. So, for instance, in Asian and Latino, we're more collectivistic cultures, right, Karen? Would you agree?
I would.
Yeah, more collectivistic. So, after you are done with school, independence could mean you could get a job but still come back to the family. For instance, in the Asian culture, Chinese culture, it's important for the children to come back and live with the parents and contribute and sometimes even take care of them as they get older. But a lot of times, I think independent living can also be interpreted in a very extreme way as living completely by yourself in your own apartment with your own white picket fence house, and if you could see, drive a car. So those are very different meanings. I wanted to leave y'all with a few questions to think about before we transition to our next topic. What does independence mean to you and to your student? And also, at what age should visually impaired students start being part of the decision-making process, which impact them? How can we prepare and empower students and families to be self-determining in a culturally appropriate way? So when the time comes for the students to assume those adult responsibilities, the transition can be done as successfully as they can. And now I'm going to pass it off to Karen to discuss empowerment.
Thank you, Anne. I'd like to begin my discussion of empowerment with a personal anecdote of something that happened to me throughout my K-12 education after mainstreaming to the public school system. So throughout my K-12 education, I was fortunate and privileged enough to be able to receive orientation and mobility skills training from orientation and mobility instructors in my local school district. And I received this training for both on and off-campus travel. Despite receiving this training, however, when I would be navigating my school environment to and from classes and whatnot, students would approach me oftentimes and just, I'm going my own merry way, not bothering anyone, and turn left! And I'm like, turn left? Why? I knew clearly well that to the left of me was a wall, for example. They're asking me to turn left to crash into a wall, which led to oftentimes a lot of teasing that went on. And this leads to my first point of developing intrinsic motivation, which by that I'm referring to the fact that someone can experience ownership of his or her actions. So they're able to perceive their actions as their own. So when I was being teased by so many people, jumping over my cane and whatnot, I was intrinsically motivated to not listen to them, to follow the route that my orientation and mobility instructor taught me. And so this example is showing you that there are many disruptions towards developing that intrinsic motivation, the biggest of which in this example would be being surrounded by peers, by normal-sided peers that you are trying to see and trying to fit in with, which is what you're trying to do as a growing person. And so as you're trying to navigate fitting in and learning the social cues and whatnot, you also have to understand the fact that people are not going to be the nicest people all the time. So that's one disruption towards developing that intrinsic motivation. Another of which would be the media, how the media portrays many topics now, disability and otherwise, as well as one that many of you might be familiar with, lack of accessible materials. How are you supposed to cope with that when you don't have the materials that you need in a classroom? Say you walk into a mainstream and general education room for the first time, you're a totally blind or a partially sighted person, you don't know what a whiteboard is, so you don't know to ask for assistance for someone to read the board to you, for example. So as teachers and transcribers and educators and whatnot, when you're approached with these types of situations, if a student approaches you, from my experience, what worked for me was seeing the positive side of the situation. So as professionals working with blind and visually impaired students, rather than stressing pity or anger at learning that a student was being teased, you could acknowledge the fact that, yes, student, I understand that you're angry, that it's okay to feel sad, to feel frustrated, but at the same time, you can see how ignorant people can be and eventually learn to laugh at situations like that. And this leads to the second point that comes with developing intrinsic motivation. With intrinsic motivation comes resilience, which is referring to achieving positive outcomes in spite of the challenging or threatening circumstances that you may be facing. With resilience comes traits that you can develop, such as social competence, so humor, going back to my example before, learning to laugh at situations when you're being teased, learning communication skills, as Anne just mentioned to you all, problem-solving skills, what are you going to do when you don't have accessible materials? All of this involves abstract thinking, such as planning for when you don't have that accessible material, being resourceful, asking classmates, asking others, paraprofessionals and professionals around you. Developing critical consciousness to make students aware of adverse situations that they may be facing. So as a teacher, you can let the student know, okay, now that you've mainstreamed to X campus, students might not be the nicest students to you, but you can learn strategies to help the general education population socialize with you more so that you can resolve and prevent these situations from happening. And with developing resilience also comes autonomy, so you can learn independence, whatever independence may mean to you in the culture that you may come from. And teaching the student to involve themselves in their environment during both positive situations and negative situations. Many of you, all of you actually, should have received a handout that we were distributing in print or braille. If you did not receive one, feel free to let us know. One of the handouts that you've received is a sheet called Smart Goals. And the other page that's included in your packet is a list of resources that we've developed, that we've compiled, that are both disability and non-disability related community resources that we'll be utilizing for our next activity. And lastly, I'd like to leave you with the idea of mentorship, which we've brought up several times throughout the presentation. And through mentorship, Survivor Thrive encourages students to involve themselves in their community where they reside, as well as in extracurricular activities on and off campus. We also stress to our mentees that we collaborate with to find supportive peers and to find positive teacher influences, such as many of you all in the room that are either already positive influences or aspiring to be a positive influence in students' lives. As well as we give them strategies to develop that resilience and using opportunities to develop the intrinsic motivation in different domains that they may be coming across. So now I'll be passing it on to my colleague Danny to be discussing our next activity, which is more interactive. You all get to talk now.
Thank you, Annie and Karen, for bringing up culture competency and the SMART goals. We're going to be using it, as Karen said, in this next activity, which is creating a welcoming meeting or IEP. As Karen mentioned, we're not going to be yapping at you the entire time. You all get to socialize with each other and to contribute to the conversation. Before going into the activity itself, a couple of elements that we suggest, as well as is written in the literature, is BIG, building a rapport with the family, individualizing the IEP process, and generating a plan of action for the future. Now, we want you to break off into small groups and sort of create a couple of ideas on how to create a welcoming meeting or IEP, and then we'll come back together as a collective to speak more about it. And then if you don't have any handouts, please let us know. They're up in the front as well that talk about the SMART goals, which we are.
Or if you have an electronic device, we can also pass them around digitally, because we realized that there were not enough Braille copies being distributed.
There are still a couple of Braille copies. What was that BIG again?
Building rapport.
Building rapport.
With the family. Individualizing the IEP.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. So in conservation of time, we're going to move onwards. We really appreciate what you've all mentioned. I've certainly learned a lot. So I hope you all learned a lot as well. Another concept that we wanted to touch upon was dialogue, but you all relatively spoke about it already. And what we mean by that is we want students and family members to have an honest and candid dialogue with all of the faculty, whether it be participation in the process beforehand or having them speak about their ideas, so it's not automatically discarded or they feel as though maybe we have to come in here adversarially, so that just because we didn't have that effective dialogue or communication between family members, team members, and students.
Great, thank you. And then I'm going to just kind of encapsulate or summarize some of the things, great points that you all shared already that I also learned a lot from. And one of them I wanted to kind of revisit is buy-in, that a lot of people were like, that's definitely true. And I've seen also from firsthand experience as well as in the literature that maybe having the student lead a particular portion, present something positive they've accomplished in the IEP, can help solicit that buy-in, because A, they're not just sitting there listening to 15, 10, however many people just say negative things about me, and B, it is again going back to the idea of an IEP is not an adversarial place. It's a place of celebration of what we've all accomplished, the teachers, with the support staff, the family, the student. So again, having that student take ownership, prepare them for advocating and also presenting, hey, I'm so proud of learning Braille at this time, or I'm so proud I mastered this street crossing is really important. And again, going back to preparing for the IEP and translation, having parents have some of the information in advance so that a cane doesn't get translated to a stick, or some sort of thing that's not exactly the right translation, to help them feel more at ease, to know what their child is receiving and be able to provide input and suggestions at a more equitable level. And lastly, to offset some of the power dynamics, maybe providing some snacks or providing coffee or some sort of thing to offset that tension. We're all here to celebrate and work to make progress and continue to have that, build upon that progress, not here to argue and get people upset because we're either excluding them unintentionally or just saying too many negative things or what have you.
And also to add to what Anne and Danny have mentioned and what you all have mentioned, taking into consideration the parents' culture. What culture do they come from? Is it more of a collectivistic culture, such as the Latino culture, or the Asian culture, in which family members help one another and provide for one another? Or is it more of an individualistic culture? And depending on these traits, the cultures take different values. They attribute different values to education. So taking that into account, and many of you have also mentioned the importance of student involvement in the IEP. Well, part of making a student or allowing a student to be involved in his or her education is providing the IEP to the student in their preferred reading medium. So providing it in Braille, electronically, large print, etc. As well as inviting the families, so providing a note ahead of time to the families to let them know that this IEP is going to be taking place. And lastly, I'd like to thank you all for participating in our interactive portion, and we'll be transitioning now to the end of our presentation.
You've all made it, and oh, is it not moving?
No, it's not.
Oh, well, I guess the PowerPoint decided to give up. But you all made it. I'm glad. So thank you all. Hopefully this was a mutually beneficial experience that we all got to learn from each other, your colleagues, family members, former students, everybody, all the stakeholders at this table, and to try to make progress. All the subjects have to work together, use a medium, whether it be understanding each other's culture or providing the IEP in the preferred medium and language to achieve that outcome. The outcomes in the IDEA that we mentioned about economic self-sufficiency and participation in the community, because we all are striving for that outcome. We may be doing it using different ways, but we all want to get to the same destination, so that's very important to think about. Again, hopefully you've learned some of the cultural competencies that we've discussed, considered self-motivation strategies from the student's perspective, and also acquired some of the family-oriented communication strategies that we have discussed to allow all to participate at this table. And our PowerPoint is not working, but we would have had a list of references in case you're all interested in learning more about some of the very exciting theories that was discussed, or some of the definitions and articles that Karen and others have listed about motivation and
Resilience.
the big model, the Bridges article. And lastly, I wanted to thank again, in addition to you all, my colleagues who have given wonderful presentations. I think we should all give everybody a round of applause. Contact information that I will read since this.
Ann?
Oh,
It's Richard.
yes.
I have a question. I know you have a few minutes. Do you have time for possibly the audience to ask you guys questions?
Oh, yeah, of course. We're almost done. So some of the contact information, we would love to hear from you all. Again, we can't emphasize enough, this is a collaborative setting, so we would love to hear any feedback or suggestions you have for us at Survivor Thrive. Our phone number is 213-537-7884, and we have an email address, which is SOTVI, V as in Victor, 2012@gmail.com. We also have a bunch of social media outlets like YouTube, Twitter, a blog, and Facebook. And then I'll pass it off to Danny to conclude us.
Yes, I'll try to go as fast as possible because I know you all are jumping to ask us questions. So, do y'all remember the student that we spoke about in the beginning, Filbert? Well, just to remind you all, just in case you forgot because it's been a very long presentation. So, Filbert was a student who was having a lot of difficulty deciding on where to go after high school, whether it be independent living skills centers or going to a college right away. Well, with support from all of his family members and the partners from the campus, they had a dialogue, they gave their input, and he decided to attend an independent living skills center, specifically Howland Center for the Blind. And at the Howland Center for the Blind, he learned how to utilize different assistive technologies, such as JAWS, screen reader, as well as a Braille Sense, which is sort of a computer, well, I think you all know, right? And he learned how to cook different types of foods, such as steaks and pastas. And now, he's currently attending Pasadena City College, where he's majoring in computer science. He's the president of the Access Technology Club, has contributed to the conversation at a assistive technology conference in Canada, specifically known as Web for All, and is currently beta testing the Ira glasses, which are a lens that has a camera attached to the frame that auditorily vocalizes its surroundings while you're traveling. So, you know how much we would appreciate it when we can't see those signs. So. And that pretty much concludes.
Oh, we have the PowerPoint up, so do you want to play the...
Yes. So we have a quotation from Filbert about Survivor Thrive in general, and then our mentoring program.
To this day, I still remember how helpful and relevant the information they provided was to me. Furthermore, the workshop was a great chance to network and socialize with other like-minded individuals. At the time, I was faced with the difficult decision of either attending a community college or an independent living skills center, which I had recently learned more about. She also maintained an unbiased attitude throughout the entire process, emphasizing the importance of taking charge of my own life. Survive or Thrive as a whole has proven to be a greatly valuable asset, and I do not know where I would be without them.
And this concludes the structured portion of our presentation. We have a few minutes for any questions or feedback. Thank you.
And once again, if you could stick up your hand or vocalize.
Or just come up and talk to us. That would work too.
Yeah.
Sheet in the back. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.